For those passionate about the systems they collect for, console and game variations are always a consideration when making a purchase. For most of us, it's the choice between a multitude of console colors and revisions, or picking up a standard version versus limited edition game. However, for the completionist collector, it can be a matter of getting every last variant for one particular game or region. Take Earthworm Jim 2 on the NES for example. For someone who's trying to complete a North American set, they would need the original release, the Majesco re-release, and some might argue the white label variant. This is Retro Impressions, and we are looking at the short story behind Majesco, Nintendo, and the rare SNES white label carts. Majesco sales was started in 1986 by Morris Sutton and his two sons for the purpose of acquiring games for publication that had been abandoned or cycled out of print by their original publisher. This business model was a success, giving them a bit of clout in the industry as a company that could earn money off of properties most others deemed to have no value. Near the end of the Super Nintendo's lifespan, Majesco reached a deal to manufacture and publish games for the system and started licensing the rights to reissue games from different publishers. In total, they would release nearly 50 previously available games and publish one unique work. Unlike the majority of original games that were manufactured by Nintendo, publication of these reprints was done in Mexico, and some significant changes were made to keep the cost down so they could be sold at the budget price of $20. When Nintendo originally manufactured these games in Japan, they used the highest quality materials and processes available at the time. Majesco, on the other hand, cut corners where they could. The high-gloss labels were substituted for ones with a low-quality matte finish that has generally aged poorly. The boxes were all lower quality as well. While it might not be visibly noticeable when a Majesco box isn't sitting next to one printed by Nintendo, they have a distinctive rough feel to them. Once you've felt the two boxes one after the other, identifying each box by touch alone shouldn't be an issue. All Nintendo manufactured games came with color print manuals, while the reissues received vastly downgraded ones that were black and white. It's honestly a bit nostalgic as they are very close to the quality of reprinted manuals received along with most game rentals in the 80s and 90s. The final significant change was to the label found on the back of each cart. This was now molded directly into the plastic. To further compound the confusion, Nintendo eventually moved production to Mexico near the same time, so it's not uncommon to see late-release games such as Earthbound sporting Made in Mexico on the box. To be clear, Majesco didn't reissue any first-party or second-party Nintendo games, and all the games released by Majesco have the phrase assembled in Mexico on the box and on the cartridge. There's also one other notable publisher who manufactured Super Nintendo carts, and that's EA. Their games are easy to tell apart because they were made in Puerto Rico and of course all sport the EA logo. It's generally accepted that production of non-EA SNES carts follow this timeline. From the system's launch until 1995, all licensed Nintendo games were manufactured in Japan. This means that any game released during this period, yet sporting Made in Mexico on the box, is most likely a late pressing of the game by Nintendo. From mid-1995 until 1997, Nintendo mostly made their games in Mexico, and these boxes contained the Made in Mexico notation. This is true for all late-release games such as Donkey Kong Country 3. At some point between 1996 and 1998, Majesco began to reissue out-of-print third-party Super Nintendo games. Every single game that Majesco reissued listed the origin as assembled in Mexico. As far as I'm aware, every non-EA game that was reissued has a Made in Japan counterpart. As support for the system dwindled in the late 90s, Majesco was sitting on some overstock consisting of unfinished cartridges and games used for in-house quality control and testing purposes. These unfinished games had been assembled with the PCB placed into plastic shells, but that was it. Purchase orders for these titles had ceased as the Super Nintendo was no longer being stocked on store shelves, and while Nintendo made a late push with the Super Nintendo Junior in 1998, it only remained available for purchase for 1 year. For Majesco, it seemed pointless to spend money to complete additional packaging for stock that was nearly worthless. However, it was sitting on the shelves and something had to be done. There were a few bulk buyers across the country who specialize in selling discounted games that might be interested in making a deal. With that, the decision was made to finish these games as cheaply as possible. Instead of printing colored labels, they chose to utilize the same cheap die-cut labels that were used for their in-house quality control cartridges. These were plain Jane white labels with a red outline containing the name of the game on the front and Super Nintendo at the top. These games were then placed in the factory cartridge bags and sealed with a piece of tape before shipping to their new home. These were new games manufactured under license while the system was still being supported, yet they sported labels that look like something you might see on a prototype game, and this has in fact become an issue. As very few people are aware of these labels or their origin and history, it's not uncommon for people to mistake these for kiosk carts or prototype releases, as most prototypes contain a similar no-frills white label with simple text. While it's very unlikely to see one of these in the wild, it's also common for people to mistakenly believe this rare variant is nothing more than a cheap replacement label due to the low standard of quality Majesco implemented in finishing these games. In the end, it's these games that reflect people's continued desire to have access to games at a reasonable price, even in the case where just a couple years have passed after most of these went out of print. It's a culture of selling units we still see active today, mainly in the PC gaming market, with steep discounts being given to games that have been available for a reasonable period of time. Majesco's foresight to capitalize on the massive installed user base left behind by Nintendo and Sega as they abandoned their 16-bit consoles to focus on the next generation is an extremely fascinating piece of history, something I hope to eventually cover in my Sega Formats series. I want to give a special thanks to Armando at Pixel Vault Games for making this episode possible by supplying the two white label, or as he calls them, candy cane variant carts. Thanks for watching. Feel free to leave a positive or negative comment letting me know your thoughts. Click subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. If you're interested in staying updated on upcoming projects and channel news, follow me on Twitter. Until next time, I'm Genovi and this has been Retro Impressions and Reviews.